What if I told you that Rick James and Neil Young both once played in the same band? Yes, before the Stone City Band, the Mary Jane Girls, and his iconic feud with Prince, Rick James was in a funk band with Neil Young. They were called the Mynah Birds. They were active from 1964 to 1967, and they were based in Canada. But Rick James was born in Buffalo, New York, so what was he doing in Canada? Rick James, born James Ambrose Johnson Jr., realized his musical talents at an early age. He began his music career jumping around the city with local jazz bands, and at 15 years old, signed up for the U.S. Naval Reserves in hopes of dodging the draft for the Vietnam War. As a reserve member, he was expected to make 2 sessions each month on the USS Enterprise in order to maintain his status. James found himself missing these 2 sessions and was ordered to Vietnam as punishment. Now, it was at this time that James's mother took it into her own hands to protect her son. She drove him across the border to Toronto, Canada to avoid the draft. Once in Canada, Ricky immediately got into trouble, getting jumped by a group of men outside of a nightclub. He was saved by a group of 3 other men. 2 of these men would prove to change a young James's life. These men were Levon Helm and Garth Hudson. They would famously go on to form the band. Now, Levon and Garth were currently in a band called the Hawks, and they were playing a show down the street that same night. They invited Rick, and during their show, Rick somehow ended up on stage, impressed the band, and was invited to join. They renamed themselves to the Sailor Boys. Now, James at this time started going by Ricky James Matthews. This nickname was given to him by Shirley Matthews, who had a dead cousin of the same name. She gave him the nickname so Rick could stay anonymous while he was a fugitive. A year later, they're able to cut their first single in 1965 called the Mynah Bird Hop. This 45 is notoriously difficult to find, and the single did not perform well. Now, the Mynah Birds went through several lineup changes. The band at this point consisted of Ricky James Matthews, St. Nicholas, Rick Cameron, and Frank Arnell. But after their single was released, they decided to add 1 more guitarist to the band. They chose a local folk musician by the name of Neil Young to come into the band. He joined the band as the guitarist, and the Mynah Birds started getting a lot of momentum at this time. They were signed by Motown. They recorded their next single, It's My Time. Really love you, darling, with love that's so strong and so fine. And an album was in the works. What would a Rick James story be if there wasn't just a little bit of drama? The band found out that their manager was embezzling funds and misusing their money, so they fired him. In retaliation, their manager ratted on young Ricky Johnson to Motown as AWOL from the Navy and a fugitive. James was arrested by the Navy and incarcerated. The single remained unreleased until 2006, and the album was scrapped. After he was incarcerated, he was sentenced to 6 months at a labor camp. And this wouldn't be a Rick James story without a few more twists. He escaped after 6 weeks, spending another 6 months on the run. At this point, he surrendered himself again and was sentenced to 5 years of labor, but with the help of his cousin, was able to plead it down to 5 months. And in August of 1967, Rick James was released from the Portsmouth Naval Prison